In 1985, two filmmakers with very different styles each made their own zombie movie. One of the films, made by George Romero, was designed as a closing chapter to a trilogy and was far more bleak, more nihilistic and more challenging than anything he had made before. The other film was what ended up being the first in a brand new zombie franchise, and it was almost the polar opposite to Romero's zombie movie in tone and style. This was a fun, high-energy teen movie with a punk sensibility and plenty of knowing, playful nods to the subgenre.
Did you see that movie, Night of the Living Dead?
But these two movies have perhaps more similarities than initially meets the eye, and while they received very different reactions from audiences at the time, they both became arguably two of the most important and influential movies in the subgenre. Join me as we continue exploring the evolution of the zombie movie as we review Dan O'Bannon's Return of the Living Dead and George Romero's Day of the Dead. Welcome back to the Evolution of Horror. My name is Mike, and as ever, I am your host. If you're tuning in for the first time, then welcome. In this podcast, we explore and dissect the evolution of the horror genre by looking at particular subgenres across several weeks. We are currently in the middle of exploring the evolution of the zombie movie, and this is part 10, in which, as the intro suggested, we are going to be looking at these two movies, Return of the Living Dead and Day of the Dead, both from 1985, in spoilerific detail. This is your spoiler warning. If you haven't seen these two movies, we will be discussing them in depth, including their endings. So please do give yourself a treat. Go away and watch them first. So, very exciting. I've got three guests joining me for the discussions this week. Later on in this episode, I am going to be joined by director of Frankenstein's Creature and host of the Arrow video podcast, Sam Ashurst, to discuss Return of the Living Dead. But first of all, I've got some brand new guests joining me to discuss Day of the Dead. They might be considered the ultimate power couple when it comes to horror filmmaking. Both of them are writers and filmmakers. They've both been involved in some very exciting projects, which we will get into. It is my great pleasure to welcome to the podcast Kat Davies and James Moran. Hello, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. First of all, just tell me a bit about yourselves, sort of who you both are, what you do.
I have written 3 films, Severance, Cockneys vs. Zombies and Tower Block, and I've written episodes of Doctor Who, Torchwood and many other things. Made short films, the most recent one being Bloodshed, which is a sensitive drama about a man's obsessive love for a shed that starts eating people.
Amazing. Brilliant. I'm going to ask you about some of those movies again in a minute. But Kat, what about you?
I'm a writer, director, producer, creator of short films. Probably the most well-known ones being Connie, which is now available on iTunes. And Bloodshed with James, that I co-wrote with him and produced and designed. And there's so many things in the pipeline. I was one of Fright Fest New Blood writers last year, one of 8 feature film projects. So I am currently working on that.
Ooh. Anything you can tell us about that?
It's a period horror, as in periods set in the 1940s, not about periods, although I would love to write a horror film about periods.
I think we need one of those.
I think we do. I think The Love Witch opened the door to that with, tampons in jars. I'm totally down for writing one of those. And I have 2 other feature scripts. One is a 1980s set drama and another is one that James and I have collaborated on. It's an interesting piece. It's an interesting piece that we've written together.
Brilliant. So it sounds like, both of you have pretty much you've done a lot of horror then, basically, between you both. It's fair to say that you're both big horror fans then, by the sounds of it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up with brilliantly irresponsible parents who just let me watch everything anyway, but
love it.
We had lots of local video shops, and I think Roxy Video in Real, they used to have 5 VHS tapes of £5, and you could have whatever you wanted for a week. So that's kind of how I discovered zombies, like Dawn of the Dead and Frankenhooker. I'm actually looking at my Blu-ray titles now,
yeah,
and I can
it's
see so many of the films that I was first introduced to on VHS and things. Oh my God, Life Force as well. We saw everything on VHS basically, and I couldn't have been much older than 4, 5, 6 when I saw most of these things. But they were always very good with me in telling me that it wasn't real and it was just makeup, and talking about how films are made, which is probably why I'm the way I am now.
You do what you do, yeah. Do you remember what your like your kind of earliest horror movie experience, what your kind of formative horror movie was?
Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors, I think.
What a film.
I think that was my first one.
What an intro.
I think it was.
That film is great because, I mean, it is scary, but it also does kind of feel like a kid's film. It kind of feels like a fantasy film or something, doesn't it?
Fun.
Like one of those kind of 80s fun fantasies.
And it's a fun romp.
Yeah.
It's a really fun romp. And I remember so many of those deaths so well. It really, really stuck with me. And Robert Englund is so good as Freddy. I fancied him. It's really weird. Like, he's scary and he's got blades for fingers, but he's witty and acerbic and kind of hot and dangerous. Oh my God, that says so much about my 20s. That's just insane.
And a child murderer.
And a child murderer. Let's wind that back.
But you can change him.
I can fix him. I swear. He just needs the love of a good woman.
Yeah, he means well. Absolutely. I like him in number 3 in Dream Warriors. I think he's just the right balance of kind of acerbic and evil. He goes too far into camp after that one, I think, but I think that movie like struck the perfect balance. Yeah.
In New Nightmare, he sort of reclaimed the character a
he
bit.
brought it back.
But 4, 5 and 6 is a bit I pretend they don't exist.
Yeah, exactly. We have to be quite selective as horror fans with some of these franchises, don't we? As we'll get into with Romero as well.
So take what you're given and then sort of love what you can.
Pick your favourites from there.
This is why horror films always make money. If you make them cheap enough, they'll always make money, because we'll all go and see. We'll go and see them anyway.
Yes,
because we're like, it's probably going to be shit, but just in case it's not, I have to go and see it. So we're always there. They know we'll always turn up.
Totally. And there's something, even the shit ones they usually have some fun redeeming
qualities,
there,
aren't
they?
Completely.
I mean, I don't remember the first horror I saw, but I remember like doing the 3 or the 5 for a weekend video shop thing.
Was that a boarding school as well?
Yeah, it was before and during that as well. I would just go to the local shop and rent stuff out and just watch it over the weekend, and just watch them over and over and over again. And sort of choosing them by the video covers, which was not always a good option, a good plan.
We always did though back then. Everyone did, didn't they? It was
but
all about
I saw a lot at boarding school. We were there sort of like for 3 weeks at a time.
Right.
So on Saturday nights, the 6 years would go and choose 2 videos.
Great.
So you never know what they were going to be. Sometimes you didn't even know the title, because if you ask them and they go, fuck off. You're like, okay.
Okay. We'll get what you're given.
So you just sit there in the assembly hall at night on Saturday, and you're like, what are we watching? Don't know what. So you wouldn't even know the genre.
Amazing.
So it would come up, and because you didn't have the internet back then, back in the 1940s, you wouldn't know anything about the film in advance. So like, I'd never heard of the Terminator, and then it comes up and it's like the Terminator. Well, what's this? That sounds good.
Wow.
Didn't know if it was a sci-fi or a horror or a comedy, and it wasn't a comedy. Spoiler.
No. Turned out no.
But then we'd watch it, and we'd have no preconceptions. We'd have no idea what was going to happen. And then if we liked it, we could sort of come in the next day and just before they went back in the afternoon, and just watch them over and over again in the AV room. And so we did that with the Terminator. I think we watched it about 10 times. We stayed up late, and it was that was insane. But I used to watch all those. It's weird, like there were 18 certificate films, but they would show these making of programs at like 4:00 in the afternoon, where they would show how they did all the makeup effects, but like in graphic detail. And I was like, so why am I not allowed to rent an 18 film, but I can see this in detail?
It's weird, that, isn't it? Yeah,
it is. But it would give me a good idea for what to rent next, because I would see how something was done with the makeup. I'm like, oh, I have to watch that in the film now, and I would go and rent it out. So again, irresponsible parenting. But you kind of you'd watch something and it'd be a bit too much for you, and you get a bit freaked out. But then you'd be all right for the next one. So you sort of build up a tolerance. It sounds like I'm teaching serial killers how to become detached from
you
reality.
Build up a tolerance, and it gets easier.
Yeah, and then one day you kill someone for real, and you feel a bit sick the first time, but then when you killed 5 people, you just do it to see the expression change in their face.
I've just realised, I think one of the first ones I saw as well, I think might have been The Fly, which is pretty full on, and like my parents are great Cronenberg fans anyway. So yeah, I think Nightmare on Elm Street, Evil Dead, lots of video nasties.
Great.
and lots of Cronenberg,
did
but
like-
also lots of Woody Allen films. And he's still my favourite director, probably, controversially
You're not
now
allowed to say that in
I'm not
2019,
allowed
Kat.
to say that in
Speaking of
2019.
How dare you?
I'm still allowed to say Annie Hall is amazing, surely, but glossing over that point.
Let's not go down that wormhole. What about the zombie subgenre then? You know, like obviously, James, you wrote Cockney versus Zombies, so to tell me about your sort of love for the zombie subgenre in general.
Oh, I've always loved it. I mean, it was one of the things that, you know, it's sometimes you'd rent something as a kid or you'd see it at school. And I think the first one I saw was at school. I'm pretty sure it was Zombie Flesh Eaters.
What film?
I didn't know what zombies were. I hadn't heard of them at all. So when people say, "Oh, it's a zombie film," I was like, "What's a zombie?" It's like, "Oh, it's all this like these things that come back to life and they eat people." And it was like a brand new genre for me. I guess for people at the time, you know, when they first came along. So I'd never seen anything like it, and it just absolutely scared the shit out of me because there were these horrible things that were just covered in maggots and rotting away. And even though they were really, really slow, it was really scary because they just kept coming.
Yes.
And
Relentless,
you'd
yeah.
kill like 50 of them, but there'd be 50 more.
Yes.
And like,
There's no reasoning, nothing.
Yeah, and even if you got 100 miles away, you couldn't relax. You couldn't even sleep properly because there might be one around the corner just silently shuffling towards you, and you wouldn't know until it was right there.
Yeah.
And you could live and live and live, and then you make one tiny mistake, you get bitten, that's it, done, it's over.
You're describing my journey into central London on the tube most days of the week.
Well, exactly. There's a lot, and there's a lot of that, isn't there, in zombie movies? It's like Shaun of the Dead. They're kind of comparing zombies to society and that kind of thing. A lot of people have said, James. In fact, nearly everyone has said so far on this podcast that, like, well, you get a lot. There are a lot of zombie movies out there, and is that because simply that it's one of the most popular subgenres, that audience just want more and more and more of it, or is it that there's practical reasons too, that zombie movies are quite easy and cheap to make, you know, practical reasons like that? I mean, what do you think in terms of, and you know, where did that kind of seed of Cockney versus Zombies originally come from in terms of sort of how that came to be?
I think so, but it's the thing you discover when you make a zombie film is they're not actually easy or cheap to make. A lot of horror is because
there's a lot of
it's like
people in
you just
them,
get
right?
a few people in a cabin and some ketchup and start killing them.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it's easy to do. But when it's zombies, it's like, right, when you need more than one zombie, you need quite a few, and they all need to be made up.
Yes.
Otherwise, they'll look shit. And it's actually this massive sort of epic because you're coordinating hundreds of extras, and it's ridiculous. It's really, really difficult. But it's just something that I think everyone just loves zombies, and everyone finds them kind of funny but scary at the same time because you can laugh at them and take and you know and make jokes, but they will just still keep coming. And I've always wanted to make a zombie film. I mean, once I'd sort of discovered the Fulci zombie as a kid, and then we kind of moved into the Romero, so I kind of did it backwards. And that was a whole other level. It was like, oh, now there's these kinds of zombies, and they're kind of funny, but there's this really, really graphic makeup effects and headshots and things. I got really obsessed with headshots.
Yeah. There's something really satisfying about the violence in zombie movies.
Yeah,
that I
yeah.
find.
And even if it wasn't a zombie film, if I was in the video shop and if I looked at the back and there was somebody getting a headshot,
Yeah.
I'd be like, right, I'm renting that.
Yeah.
Sight unseen, don't care what it's about. I just want to see some heads blown off.
Totally.
I was a strange child.
Totally.
It comes around in cycles, doesn't it? So for 5 years or so, you'll have lots of vampire movies, and for 5 years or so, there'll be nothing but slashers, and then there'll be another zombie cycle that comes round, and it feels like we're sort of coming to an end
Yes.
on The Walking Dead,
I think so.
which is not necessarily a bad thing. And
I think we're at the end of
we're a bit
big cycle
exhausted
of zombies, aren't
with
we?
zombies right now, so
Yeah.
I'm wondering what the next big thing is going to be. It
And
felt
they'll
sort of
come
folky
back.
and witchy for a while, but that's kind of
I
going
think,
away
I
again.
think, I think folky and
Yeah.
witchy is where we are, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you kind of aware of that when writing Cockney versus Zombies as well? Kind of that there are so many, I suppose, and like keeping it fresh, or you
Yeah.
know, also how much you kind of pay like homage to the classics as well. And
Yeah, I mean the original pitch was Matthias, the director's idea, and he wanted to do a zombie comedy set around a bank robbery. So I've always wanted to write a zombie film. So my thing was, right, I want to build on what's come before.
Yeah.
I want slow zombies because they're the proper ones, because they're and I like fast zombies. Don't get me wrong, they're great fun.
they're scary.
But if you're going to do a zombie film, I want slow ones at least the first time.
And there are some amazing jokes in your movie about the slow moving zombie.
Don't tell him he's funny. Don't do that to me.
Honestly, it's so funny, James. I'm a big fan of that film. But
Well,
anyway,
that's kind of like my commentary on zombie films. I was like, right, if I never get to make another zombie film, then I get to put all my jokes and thoughts about zombie films in. I get to show all my obsessions, and also you're building on such a massive backlog of amazing films. I just think it was my responsibility as well I have to come up with at least 3 things I haven't seen before in zombie films, because every zombie film you see, there's something new in there and you go, oh wow, and then it gets copied. So I thought I want to come up with something that gets copied later, and I think we came up with quite a few things, and some of them were mine, some of them were Matthias's, some of them were other suggestions, because as I was writing it, he's an amazing artist. He would just draw things, random things, and he's so polite. He's like, "Is it okay if I send them to you?" I was like, "Yeah, I'll take your free stuff. Yeah, go on." Yeah. So he'd just send drawings over, and then they would work their way into the script. And some of them didn't, but some of them, like one of them, he'd drawn without knowing what I was scripting. He'd drawn a zombie with a steel plate in its head, and I thought, "Oh, that's a great idea." Because then how do they kill it? And then I came up with an entire character with a whole storyline, and then that became one of the set pieces of the whole film, and he had no idea that was going to happen. So it was just to sort of pay homage to the classic Romero zombie film, to try and do something new and make people laugh, and kind of make a joke about, they are dead, they will walk slowly. And I also wanted to, a lot of films and TV things, they're very sort of coy about calling them zombies. Mm-hmm. So, they're walkers.
Yes,
they're
the infected.
Yes.
I hate that phrase.
They've got a virus, or the infected.
Yes.
And I just thought, no, I just want everyone to call them zombies and know that they're zombies, because there's a lot of zombie films, and we've all seen them, and there's a lot of them where they waste about 10 minutes where the character's like, oh my god, I'm shooting him and he's just not going to, and the audience is like, yeah, you got to shoot him in the head, and the audience is bored because we know what the rules are, and we don't want to watch you figuring it out again for the millionth time.
Yes,
but also
we all know, don't we?
Have they never seen a zombie film?
Yeah, exactly.
As well,
it makes it funny, and we were going for a funny film, obviously, from the title. I just thought it'd be funny if, instead of like, oh my god, the dead are walking, they're just like, yeah, it's zombies.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck's sake, better deal with that now. Great.
Yeah, we've all prepared.
Bloody London,
Exactly. This is the crucial question for you both. What is your plan for surviving the zombie apocalypse? Where would you go? What would you do? I'm
going to let James take this one because he's got a full plan. Mine is not quite a strategic one.
Yeah, I've got a pretty foolproof plan. The first 20 minutes of every zombie film, mine included, there's all these little signs and things in the background. In Shaun of the Dead, there's the homeless guy eating the pigeon. In mine, there's the rats leaving the Tower of London. There's things happening. There's like, it's been a strange report in a hospital.
Yes,
all these kind of things, and everyone ignores it because it's just random background news things. I watch out for those every day. So my plan is, as soon as you see any of those, you've got a good couple of weeks. Yeah. So as soon as you see one of those signs, it's about to start. So you can get a jump on everyone. Yeah. So stage 1 is kill your neighbours. Yep. Because they're going to be the first ones who will attack you, who will wander in through your back door, or they'll either be turned and they'll bite you, or they will compromise you and they'll fuck up and get you killed. So kill them. Knock holes in each side of the house, so you've got the run of 3 houses, so you've got several exits. Go and stock up and just clear out the supermarkets, get lots of food, lots of booze, any weaponry you can, and then get in, fortify yourself, and stay indoors, and don't let anybody in.
I was just going to say, how would you feel about passers-by?
No, fuck them. They're as good as dead, and if you let them in, you're as good as dead. Yeah. So, because every zombie film, every episode of The Walking Dead, every time they let somebody in, someone gets killed.
It's
like,
true.
Nope, not happening.
It's true.
Don't even answer the door. Don't even go to the door. If someone's trying to get in through the door, then that's what your weapons are for. You shoot them where they are and let them die. They'll get eaten. And then just stay there, and it will either blow over, at which point you will get rescued, drunk off your face, or it won't, in which case you can just drink yourself to death.
Brilliant. Foolproof plan.
How That's also that is basically our Brexit survival plan as well. In all of its pure glory. No, my zombie survival plan would basically be to clear out all the booze out of Lidl. and have a mass orgy at the house and get completely shit-faced.
Oh, yours kind of turns into like David Cronenberg's Shivers or
It
something.
kind of does. Yeah, completely turns into Shivers.
Okay.
Because, if you're going to die, you might as well
Have fun.
have some jollies while you're going to die. And then just open the front door and walk out shit-faced so that you won't feel yourself getting bitten. Because at the end of the day, you're going to run out of supplies at some point. You're going to probably have to kill the people who are around you. And once you've run out of, eating testicles or bicep muscles or scalps,
Where'd you go from there?
Unless you just eat yourself. So, it's all going to come to an end, basically. So just embrace it. But shit-faced and after you've had a shag.
Shag everyone, then kill them.
I think so.
Then kill yourself.
Kill 'em, fuck 'em, eat 'em.
Basically, I'm going to get that on a t-shirt, Mike.
I think that's going to be the new slogan for this podcast. I like it.
Kill 'em, fuck 'em, eat 'em.
Yeah.
Kill 'em, fuck 'em, eat 'em.
It makes sense.
Another feature film idea for you guys there. Okay, well, that's good. Without further ado, let's begin talking about George Romero's Day of the Dead then.
First came the night, then came the dawn. Now comes the most eagerly awaited day in horror film history. George A. Romero's Day of the Dead.
Basically, the zombie apocalypse has raged on. This is a few years after Dawn of the Dead and the fun of the shopping mall were introduced to the film on the streets of Florida, and really sort of rotten zombies sort of spilling out of buildings, and an alligator for some reason who comes out of a bank, this alligator, for some bizarre reason.
The world has changed.
And basically it's a kind of civilian and military operation, and they're sort of hid out in not a cave or bunker, it's a giant underground lair, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's kind of scientists versus the military, and some civilians who really don't want anything to do with it, but one can fly a helicopter. This is where it all starts to get a bit strange. And it's basically science versus the military, and the people in power being crazy, and the normal, ordinary, everyday people who have become insane, and they are far more scary than the zombies outside.
Yeah.
That's kind of my summary of it.
He's doubled down this time round, I think, Romero, hasn't he, on humans. Humankind are shit, basically.
Yes.
Humans are the worst. Zombies are probably better than humans,
Yes.
basically.
It feels like night is sort of the beginning of the outbreak.
Yes.
Dawn is sort of you come across it in the middle of the outbreak.
Yes.
And day, it just feels like these are the last days.
Yes.
This is the
of the
aftermath.
last surviving humans.
Definitely. So, first of all, what do you guys think of this movie? I know that this movie it made less money than the first two. I think it was critically less well received than the first two as well. Do you agree with that? I mean, do you think that's the case?
It feels like a really bleak, nihilistic film. I think Dawn is really fun, and it's really satirical, and the shopping mall and Sears, it gives you it offers so many more jokes and zombies dressed in loads of interesting costumes. Whereas this one, it's underground, it's very dark, it's in shadow. The colours are all very bleak and blue and green and dark. It's a more bleak colour palette. It looks not dull. Dull's an insulting way of expressing it. It's just a different colour palette. But it feels like quite a hard watch. I think for me, it's possibly my least favourite of the three originals.
Yeah, well, I think that's the opinion of most people.
I think for me it's my least favourite of the three, but it still really offers something. And it's got Romero's stamp, which is mistrust of people in power, and he returns to, clans and mobs and people just going nuts and people behaving completely irrationally in the apocalypse setting. And he's very anti-establishment anyway in pretty much all of his films, and it feels like the same themes are there, but it's just a less fun watch, and the jokes aren't really there, and it feels to me like the character set is the weakest of the three films as well.
Interesting.
And I'm all about, doesn't matter what genre of film I'm watching, or actually to a certain extent how it looks or how good the effects are, but the characters and the way they interplay with each other has to really engage me, and these guys don't really do that for me.
Yeah, I mean, I still love it in many different ways, but I would put it third of the original three. I think just because, you know, it's a deliberate choice to go, right, I'm going to tell a story about sort of the last days, and everyone's on their last nerve, and everyone's kind of lost hope and hates each other, which is, you know, something to explore, but it does make it kind of harder to like anyone on screen.
Yes.
And I think that's the intention. I don't think you're meant to sort of really like anyone, because
Totally.
they're all quite hateful.
Yeah.
And it, you know, it clearly, like when they first set up there, it was a scientific operation, and the military was just there to sort of protect them, and then it kind of gradually, years and years went by, and it's kind of gone to pot, really. So I think all of those things kind of work against it and make it harder to enjoy on a fun level, but that's not what he's going for, you know.
Yeah.
So and I get that, but yeah, it just feels like it's the first zombie film that kind of does the whole humans are actually worse and more dangerous now than zombies are.
It feels like a template for The Walking Dead,
I was
actually.
just
We
about
were
to say
talking
that.
about this the other day.
Tonally, it is.
Yeah,
it
it
is
really
The Walking
is.
Dead,
Completely,
isn't
yeah.
it?
It really is. And I think, you know, we'll come on to Bub anyway, because everyone loves Bub.
Yeah.
But it just, I think the female protagonist as well she's just, she's spunky, but she's a bit inert at times, and she doesn't
interesting.
really do as much as the female in Dawn of the Dead. So it feels like, you know, Night of the Living Dead, the female lead is just catatonic, and then there's some progress made in Dawn, and then it's kind of Sarah takes us sort of back to a part-way
find
path
that?
between the two, because she's no Ripley, is she?
No.
You know what I mean?
No, true.
So I think there's that kind of
But also
that works
the
against
kind of the
it.
problem in the setup is, you know, as is sensible, they have barricaded themselves off from zombies.
Completely.
So there are way fewer chances for them to interact with zombies.
Yes.
So you don't get as much zombie action until it all goes tits up at the end.
It's very true.
But it's
very
not.
true.
But it's not that it goes tits up at the end. It's that for some bizarre reason, which I don't understand really as a plot point, is it Miguel? Her boyfriend just decides to go and lie on the ground and let the zombies attack him, and then he lets them into the
It's
underground.
kind of because
So-
Rhodes and the others have kind of gone completely crazy, and they're just starting to kill people. And I think he's just like, right, they're gonna kill the scientists. I need to do something here.
So let's
to
expose
try
them
and-
all to zombies. It just,
Yeah,
it
but he's
just,
like, well, if I
yeah.
don't do that, they'll all die anyway. So at least this way, it might distract the army long enough.
And he's on the edge.
And he's
all
not-
the way
he's
through
not
the
in
film,
his
isn't
right,
he? He's a
yeah.
man on the edge.
I think that's the thing with the
Poor
whole
Miguel.
film
Yeah.
is it just feels like everyone's kind of turned up to 11 from the outset.
That's very true.
And
yeah.
I think I can completely understand the need for tension if you've all been locked in together, because they haven't chosen to be together. They're just the last people on Earth, right? Trying to work out
Yeah.
why the dead are still rising, and how do you
Yes.
kill them, or do you train them? Can you harness them and
Yeah.
use them for a different purpose? Are they human still? Are they sentient? What are they? So I get that you haven't chosen to be in this environment. You just need to do it to survive. So of course you're not all going to be friends. I mean,
Yeah.
that's kind of the way it is. But from the outset, it really feels like Joe Pilato is on the ceiling, and it just feels like they're all so tense the whole time. It kind of doesn't leave it with any variation or anywhere to go.
I know what you mean. I think it's similar to Night. Dawn of the Dead feels like the anomaly in this trilogy, I think, because I think it's much more similar to Night, where you've got a group of people who hate each other trapped in this place. And actually, a huge chunk of Night of the Living Dead is just people bickering about, like, oh, should we go in the basement? Should we go? You know, like, there's just a lot of annoying people bickering with each other.
Yes.
And it's that turned up to 11 in this bunker, isn't
Completely.
it? It's like men yelling at each other.
Yeah,
most
it
of the
feels like
time.
we've come into the last 20 minutes of a film.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Except for
Which
an
we
hour
kind
and
of have.
45 minutes or something like that.
See, interestingly though, I like it the best. I don't know why. I think it feels the most technically accomplished to me as well. But I think I got more of a sense of character in this one. You're right though, none of them are likeable. But I think they're more well written and more well performed than the characters in Dawn or in Night of the Living Dead, personally. And I think the Tom Savini's work in this is incredible.
It's
It's
the
flawless.
best. It's the
flawless,
best. And I
yes.
think it's his best work. And I think he cites The Prowler as being his best
Yes,
work,
he
or
does.
used
Yeah.
to, for some
Yeah, he
strange
does.
reason, because I did a lot of stuff on slashers and saw The Prowler quite a few times, and yeah, it's very
The Prowler
good.
is great. That shower sequence with the
Is
pitchfork is
amazing, right? But this to me feels like Savini's film in a really weird way.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
when you read about how closely he worked with Romero on basically going, I've got this effect, I think we should do this. Apparently Romero would kind of defer to Savini and go, okay, how do we shoot this then? How shall we make this work?
Yeah.
Which is a brilliant, close relationship. And I love Savini's work anyway. Like, I've still got a lifelong crush on him. He could be 1,000 years old and I would still love him.
He's amazing, isn't he?
But,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, really impressive in terms of the effects. But I still struggle from one death to the next, and it feels like a film you have to endure, not enjoy.
I 100% agree. That is true. Maybe my tastes are just a bit bleaker, because for me, I find Dawn of the Dead a little bit. I just get a bit tired of Dawn, and I know this is absolute sacrilege, but like the kind of plinky plonky slapstick custard pie fight feel of Dawn of the Dead eventually
Yes.
gets to me a little bit, and
Yeah.
and I kind of like the darker side of Romero's other two movies in a way.
Yeah.
I like the little girl stabbing her mum with a
Oh
trowel,
God, I love
and
that.
you know that
yeah,
that kind
I love
of stuff.
That. I
Yeah.
love that so much,
think
and
that's
it's
why
so
I-
shocking.
That's
Ugh.
why I enjoy Dawn so much, because it's got the slapstick and the custard pies and everything. And it's really funny, and then there's a certain point where you can just feel the characters going, am I just going to spend the rest of my life doing this?
Yes,
and you're
that's
like,
very
yeah,
true.
that's what a zombie film is.
Yeah.
And it's like there's no escape.
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
they keep coming in, and it's all fine. And then the guy makes a tiny mistake and he's bitten, and that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
And he's done.
I love those characters, though.
Yeah.
I really love those characters. I mean, in this film, I love the Frankenstein doctor and Bub, but that's kind of it. And I don't have to like characters to
No, not at
really
all.
appreciate their journey and want
especially
to
in zombie
follow
movies.
them. No. But those are kind of the two that really stick out for me in this film. Anyone else, not really. And there's some strange accents going on that are
Yes.
really quite
A bit
grating.
uncomfortable,
Yeah,
yes.
and they're not. Oh, I don't want to criticize their performances, but they don't quite always pull it off.
Yeah, yeah.
And that takes me immediately out of the moment. You know, like when you hear someone doing a really awful American accent, you're like, oh,
Yeah,
I can't listen to you now, kind of
Yeah.
thing. So I have quite a few moments with this film.
And I agree, it's not a film that I'm just going to want to always just pop on for fun,
No.
ever. But I do appreciate it a lot, and I think I know that he had like his money was massively cut, his budget. I think originally he pictured this third one to be like, he described it as it was going to be like his Gone with the Wind with zombies, you know, like this big epic, big scale thing, and then he had to massively scale it down, apparently, didn't he?
I think that's part of the problem, is that because I've seen some of the plans for what it was going to be, and there was a whole above ground section with huts and experiment, and that's where the zombie corral was, which makes more sense than it being underground, where it's not quite safe. So I think there would have been more variation with the above and the below ground, and they could have had more kind of interplay, and it would have been more visually colourful and interesting.
Yes.
And I think that's a problem, which, you know, and that's something that's not anyone's fault. It's just they didn't have the money taken away from them. And I think that would have really helped, because you just feel, because even the cast were saying like that, you know, when they travel to work and then they're in these underground limestone caves for 12, 14 hours.
Oh, yeah.
And they were just like, God, I got really pale and sickly.
They had
and-
vitamin D shots, apparently. Everyone had to have vitamin D shots.
Yeah, and that's it. It's just all round not the most fun experience for
No.
anyone, is it? That's the thing. I love these like weird moments though that he throws in, like that opening dream sequence with the hands coming out of
That's
the wall.
amazing. And apparently
Yeah.
that's Savini's contribution. Savini came up with that, which is amazing,
He just
right?
wanted to do
It's
repulsion.
incredible.
Yeah,
you know.
which is brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. That was there was an advert on TV for it, like
Yes.
during the day.
Yes,
and
there
they
was,
showed
yeah.
that thing, and it scared the shit out of me. And I didn't. It was before I'd seen any zombie films. I didn't know what it was.
Yeah, and that's it, right? I
and
think
I had nightmares about
But
it.
that's my scariest bit in the whole movie.
Yeah, right. Interesting. But do you not find? I find just the whole setup and concept and idea of it quite scary and oppressive. You know,
It
like
is.
the whole. Even the Dr. Frankenstein character and these scientists who you kind of like more than the military, although not much more, but there's something quite scary about what he's doing to the zombies and what he's doing to the people, isn't there, and everything, which I know is kind of the point. It's like, who's worse here
Yeah,
out of all
exactly.
these people?
Yeah, science versus, you know, muscle.
Yes.
Really. And
Who's got the gun, who's got the power, or is it about who's
Completely.
got the knowledge or whatever? Yeah.
Completely. And are the zombies actually really that scary if they can feel compassion and they can be hurt and they can be, you know, they have memories that come out and they can be taught things, essentially.
Yes.
But I think I would have liked to have seen his vision. But apparently they costed it up, and it would have had something like or required a 6 million budget, and they could only raise 3 because he wanted to do it unrated to make it really, really gory. You know what, though? I actually think, as amazing as those effects are, I'd rather less gore and him have had the budget to really execute his true vision of what that film was supposed to be.
Well,
really, I would much rather have seen that film, because when you watch Birth of the Living Dead, the documentary, I'm literally looking at the spine of it on my shelf. When you watch that, you sort of get a sense of he never quite got to make that film, and that's really sad for such an accomplished filmmaker who'd done so much to that point. And when you look at something like Creepshow, God, I love Creepshow. We'll come up, because that's the whole basis behind Bloodshed anyway, you know, Creepshow. But when you look at those films and then you realise how much he must have had to dial his vision for the film back, and he talks about having to do some quite quick rewrites on it, and I do think to a certain extent that kind of shows through in the characters. They haven't percolated those characters. He hasn't lived with them in the same way, because he's either probably had to compress a few of them, lose a few, change their journey. I think it really comes through.
Fact is, either we are the only ones left, or there's nobody within range of my puny little Second World War signals.
We used to talk to Washington all the time. They could hear us then.
We were on relays then, we weren't over the air. You know, the power's off in the mainland now, in case you haven't heard, and all the shopping malls are closed.
We don't appreciate your fucking jokes, old man. Keep it up, and I'll shove that bottle of yours right up your wise ass.
I've got better things to do than listen to this kindergarten. Are we finished here?
No, we ain't finished here, lady. Sit down.
Yeah, see, I wonder whether this just... I mean, it must come down to my taste, I suppose. But to me, I think the writing is some of the most accomplished. That's what it feels like to me. It feels like Night of the Living Dead is George Romero, this very young, inexperienced director, kind of finding his feet and kind of finding himself and finding his style. And it's a bit rough around the edges, but stylistically stunning. But it's got a few pacing and character issues, I think, in that one. Dawn of the Dead, I think, kind of has the opposite problem, where it's bloated with too much stuff, too many themes, too many messages, too many characters, too many set pieces. I personally feel like he gets the balance right in Day of the Dead. And I think you're right, there is this real oppressive, claustrophobic feel to it, and the colour palette is quite dirgy. But I guess for me it feels the most suited to the subject matter out of the 3 films as well. I think, you know, one of my all-time favourite scenes in the film and in the whole Romero trilogy is that scene where the characters are just arguing around the table, and there's that sort of power play, and the female character, is it Sarah? She stands up, and then Rhodes, he sort of tells her to sit down, and it's a very simple kind of power dynamic, small argument going on, but it's incredibly tense, and it goes on and on and on. And to me, it's kind of an example of the best of George Romero, and sums up why these films are so good and so important.
I said we ain't finished here, lady. Sit down. Sit down, or so help me God, I'll have you shot.
You'll what?
I said I'll have you shot.
Have you lost your mind?
No, ma'am. Have you? I just told you I was willing to kill you if you didn't get back in your chair. You didn't get back in your chair.
God damn it, you can't shove us around like this. Since when did this become a military operation?
Since I took over. Steele, shoot that woman.
And you can see audiences, you can see why that there would have been disappointment, you know, from the follow-up from Dawn of the Dead, you know, there's this really fun, schlocky movie. And also, you know, I think we're probably in a bit of a place mid-80s where we were, you know, all of those kind of slasher movies, we were amid all of those franchises. Obviously, we had Return of the Living Dead that same year as well.
Which I think is part of the reason it kind of tanked.
Exactly.
Well, Dawn is so expansive. You would naturally assume, the next one's going to be even bigger, which was clearly
the plan,
and then it had to scale it back.
Yes.
I'm sure if he'd had more time, he may have just written a different story, a different script based around that budget. But he was, it was nothing he could have done really.
So what do you think, because obviously everyone talks about the kind of subtext of Romero movies. You've got the Night of the Living Dead, which whether it was deliberate or not has a lot of kind of civil rights kind of stuff going on in there, and Vietnam totally and all of that kind of thing. Obviously Dawn of the Dead absolutely hits you over the head with consumerism all the way through. There's a little bit of second wave feminism stuff in there as well, with Fran and the abortion storyline and all of that.
I'm not here to be your mother.
Yeah, exactly. What about Day of the Dead? I mean, what do you think is he kind of saying anything? Has this kind of got that same level of subtext, would you say?
Well, it came out at a really dark time. I mean, to be honest, 60s through to now is still quite a dark time, isn't it? I feel like we've gone back in time, actually, to the 80s at the moment, in terms of how bleak things are with Brexit and Trump.
How conservative we've
So I'm really interested in seeing some of the great art that's going to come out over the next sort of 5-10 years.
If we're all still alive.
But
incinerated and nuclear waste.
Exactly. It's the reason why I'm asking everyone for their tips on surviving the apocalypse. But anyway, sorry, carry on. Yeah, exactly.
But I mean, it's the sort of... I think the way he describes it, if you watch the Blu-ray extras, oh my God, that Blu-ray's great.
Yeah.
He talks about it being really dark times and everything's gone to shit and it's kind of the worst time for him, and Vietnam's come and gone, and Reagan, from thinking about The Exorcist now, it's the Reagan era as well, and it's pretty dark times, and there were loads of really dark downer ending films that came out sort of mid-80s. I'm thinking Miracle Mile, actually. So people were in quite a dark place, and I think it was the same in the UK as well, particularly with things like Threads slightly earlier. I love Threads, but it's not a fun watch. This feels like Threads, actually.
Yes, exactly.
I love Threads, and I love things like Climax and Irreversible, but I'm not going to put them on at Christmas.
No, totally.
And
exactly.
So it feels like that.
Exactly. And again, comparing this side by side to Return of the Living Dead, there is just such a difference, isn't there?
Yeah, he's got a bigger message than something like the Return of the Living Dead franchise, because also, look, he kind of birthed, if you like, what we might identify with as a zombie, even if he calls them ghouls rather than zombies. He's sort of took the zombie movie so much further with Night of the Living Dead, and then inspired pretty much everything that's kind of come since. People forget about the idea of the Caribbean zombie and all of that kind of stuff, which I think he kind of touches on in this film, actually, with the character who's got the Caribbean accent and throws out a couple of lines.
Yes.
But he sort of birthed that zombie. So, of course, films that were zombie focused that came out after Night of the Living Dead, they've taken his ideas and run with them. So then every time he comes back and he does a zombie film, he does have to do something to try and outdo himself and everyone else.
Yeah, totally.
Who's been inspired by him. So that must have been a total head fuck, really. But he's also got these sort of deeper political messages, and I don't know. Return of the Living Dead I love, but they're just completely different sorts of films. But I think that didn't help the sort of box office bomb that Day of the Dead kind of became. I mean, of course, I've read some of the reviews and they are so scathing. Like, Roger Ebert has nothing good to say about this film at all.
It doesn't deserve anything like that.
No, it doesn't, because
I still love it.
It's still incredibly well made, I think.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is. It's still, I mean, how can you not say Romero's films are incredibly well made? But I think it suffered because the audience had such an expectation of what a zombie film was going to be in 1985. And if you just come out of seeing Return of the Living Dead, you're like, great, this is going to be fun and it's going to be really jokey, because Dawn of the Dead was pretty fun. That's a riot.
Yeah.
And then you go and see this and you're just like, oh man, I'm going to go kill myself now.
Well,
this is it. This is the end of the line for me.
And it's so interesting, isn't it? That kind of generation of brilliant filmmakers. Wes Craven, I feel like it's the same kind of thing where they unintentionally almost launch these kind of schlocky, fun, almost brainless, like sort of subgenres and franchises. But actually, originally, they're like, no, we were actually trying to make a serious point about this, with what Wes Craven did with Nightmare on Elm Street or Last House on the Left or whatever. But then they kind of unintentionally become these other things. And I think, in the interim since Romero's last zombie movie. We had Fulci, and we had,
completely.
The Evil Dead. We had Michael Jackson's Thriller. We had all of these things, and then it was kind of, cut back to Day of the Dead, where Romero's like, well, actually, I'm still actually trying to do something serious with these zombie movies, But by that point, almost people maybe didn't want that anymore from
because
their
their
zombie
expectation was fun.
Yeah.
My expectation of a zombie film as a kid, again, was also fun, because pretty much all of the zombie films that I watched as a kid, they were really fun.
Yeah.
And for me, like the sort of the subtext of it for me is that people are shit and can't be trusted.
Yeah.
And now, at this point in the timeline, we are actually worse than the zombies.
Yeah.
Because they're just mindless creatures, but we are actually, like they say in Aliens, you don't see those creatures fucking themselves over for a bonus.
No,
Yeah.
totally. Well, that's what's interesting. We'll talk about the ending in a minute, but because it almost feels like the message of this movie is like, just let it happen. I think that humanity's days are done. It's now the zombies. It's their time now, almost.
That's how I feel now.
Yeah, exactly. Because you kind of feel like, you see Bub start to evolve, and you see him use a gun, which I think is quite interesting as well. Like the zombies, like first time you see them using a tool, and it's a gun to kill something, which is quite an interesting, probably social commentary there. But it's almost like he's saying, like, let humanity end. It's time for a new era, or a new world almost by this point. But then also you have this kind of, potentially a lot of people see it as a happy ending, where these group of humans do survive and they go and live on a desert island and they are happy.
It's a weird ending, really, and I don't know why. Of the three, we'll come on to the other three films later, but for me, of the original three, it's the one that I always don't forget, but I don't necessarily remember all of the detail of, and the ending particularly.
Yes,
I'm always surprised by, and I'm like, oh, how does this one end again?
Yeah.
And I think it feels like a sort of strange ending, and it's quite abrupt, and she's just ticking off the days in her calendar, and it does feel more like the message is, fuck it, let's just fish.
Yeah.
Let's get a tan.
Well, it's like you with your orgy plan,
you know? Completely. It does feel like that.
Because that's going to happen. Like, give it a couple of months.
It's so happening.
Yeah, totally.
It's so happening.
But she's in the same position as she was at the start of the film. She's just doing the calendar thing. Where it's
exactly.
Like,
nothing's really
I may not be in a
changed.
tiny room, but I'm still sort of stuck on. I'm trapped on a lovely island with lovely people, but I'm still sort of trapped because I can't really go anywhere else.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it doesn't matter what's happened. It's basically the same. She's still going to die.
Well, I quite like that about the ending. I think it gives you both, doesn't it? It has its cake and eats it, because I think you could see that as quite a nice, satisfying conclusion to what was then just a trilogy. But also, there is that feeling of like, especially the sort of ticking off the endless days on the calendar, of this kind of feeling of like, well, what now? Like, what the fuck are we going to do now? What's next?
I mean, that's the built-in fear in every zombie film, where it's like, you survive the zombies, but for what?
Yeah. And
you get away from them this
That's
time.
why I
For
said,
what?
just
Where
get
are you going?
shit-faced and go and stand out in the road and let them take you, because what are you going to live for anyway?
Literally, what is the point of trying to survive? Because they're going to get you anyway.
They're always going to get you. That's the interesting thing about the zombie movies, because generally, very apart from these Romero ones, they're all quite fun and silly movies a lot of the time, but actually they always tend to have the bleakest endings. Zombies will always win, ultimately. Humans
generally.
never do, most of the time.
I think that's why I was, not because of Day of the Dead, but just zombie films in general, I sort of reacted against it so strongly in Cockneys. I was just like, right, we're going to do it. It's going to be funny. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. And I was like, and that was one of my when I made a whole set of notes at the start. I was like, here's all the things I want to see in a film with this title. Yeah. If I go to the cinema on a Friday night and I pay my money, I want to see this, and this.
Exactly.
And I want a fucking happy ending, because it's always miserable.
Yeah,
they're all. I think there'd been quite a few miserable films quite recently when I was writing it, and I was like, and they're all going to survive, and it's going to be a good laugh, and they're going to actually stop the outbreak, and everything's going to be fine.
Yeah. And that's, that is very...
Just for once.
And that is very rare, right, in these films. It is really rare. It's part of the reason why I've stopped watching The Walking Dead, because I just kind of felt like, where's this going?
It's so dark, isn't it, now?
It started to get like how you found with Day of the Dead. It's like that, but stretched across hundreds of hours. And it just feels a bit like... I'm just watching it as a bit of a slog,
I was with that show for the first 5 seasons completely.
That's part of the MO. That's the show. It's like right from the very beginning, he wakes up, everyone's dead, and he has to shoot a little girl in the head. It's like, this is the show, guys.
I know.
It's not a barrel of laughs.
I've just remembered 2 bits of Day of the Dead actually that really did make me laugh. But I say this, but I laughed at them for the same reason I laughed at them in Dawn of the Dead. It's the zombies in different costumes. So the majorette in the opening.
Yes.
The majorette looks phenomenal.
yeah.
And then there's a clown that keeps rocking up.
Oh, the clown. That's a good
So
shout. Getting a zombie clown was a
that,
good
you know,
shout.
but I don't know, I have this expectation where it's a zombie movie. I really want to see more of those zombies. And finally you get it towards
I don't
the
think it's an
end.
unfair expectation
Yeah,
that
exactly.
you wanted zombies.
You want to see zombies in
Yeah.
a zombie movie, not people just shouting at each other.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like if they've been barricaded in this base for so long, if you do see lots of zombies early on, then it makes them really stupid, and they all die straight away.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's true.
It's got that's kind of a built-in problem in that we can't really see the zombies until the end when it all goes
No,
wrong.
so true.
But yeah, I also love the different outfits. I think partly because it's funny to see
It's just
a zombie in a
great,
funny
isn't it?
outfit, but also it kind of gives you that thing of the way that zombies keep coming and keep coming and keep coming. Like you see a zombie in an outfit, and then later on you go, oh, there's the clown again. He's come quite
always
far
good.
now. Like, oh, now the clown's in the base. Like how long has he been walking?
Yes, that whole time.
It's great. It's
exactly.
like they just keep coming and keep coming, and
The
now
best-
the clown's eating you.
It still has motor function. Probably still has powers of deliberation.
I do love some of that weird imagery in that autopsy room, though, where you've just got like the brain on a
Yes.
spine.
That's
Yeah,
reminded me of
amazing.
like a razor head or something.
That is
that
brilliant,
thing.
yeah.
I loved that. I loved the zombie just kind of sort of turning over and all of his innards kind of flopping out
Yeah.
on that autopsy table and everything. All of that stuff is great. And I think you're right. Maybe the color palette, it needs that like bit of red every now and then. It's like, ooh,
Does,
anytime
doesn't
there's
it?
something like that appears,
It really,
it's so eye-catching.
it feels like it kind of has less of Romero's visual stamp in terms of the cinematography on Day
Yeah,
of
well,
the
you're
Dead.
right. Well, you know, if you think back to Night of the Living Dead and all of those kind of like weird kind of angles
Yeah.
and almost kind of expressionist lighting, and
Really
stuff, and
does.
how different it
is really,
how much
really
it's
different.
evolved since then.
I think that's the problem with the location. And it's a great location, but I think it's sort of limited as to what you can do with it because the light. Like whenever they do have a brightly lit scene, the light just seems to sort of get sucked into the walls.
Yeah, there's a lot of
almost.
shadow in there. There's a
Yeah.
lot of shadow.
That wasn't very nice, you know. That wasn't very nice at all. Let's go. You can just sit there in the dark and think about what you've done. Think about it. Think.
Bub. I've got to ask you guys about Bub. What do you think of Bub? Surely the most likable character in the film, right?
Love Bub. I could have watched an entire film just in the lab with the scientists and Bub, and just seeing him do more stuff.
The Bub movie would have been
because he's
amazing.
so sympathetic. I mean, he's basically a mindless creature, but he's been in that room for so long, and
He's not,
he's
though.
learned so much, and he remembers things, and he looks sad when Dr. Frankenstein is killed, and he doesn't come after Rhodes to eat him. He comes after him with a gun.
I know.
He makes a
He's like,
choice. He makes
yeah,
a conscious
I'm
choice.
coming to
yeah,
get you.
Yeah. And
He's
that's
just
brilliant.
amazing. And the Walkman. This
Yeah.
amazing
iconic image.
scene
Yeah.
where he's just taught how to turn a Walkman on and off, and you can
And
see
isn't he
in
reading?
the
He's got
eyes.
Salem's Lot. He's got a
I
Stephen
think
King
Yeah,
book,
yeah.
he does
isn't
have a
he?
Stephen,
Which I
he does
love.
have a Stephen King book, and
Yeah.
I love Bub, and you can sort of see Romero's vision of where zombies evolve when it goes on to sort of Land of the Dead and all of those movies.
So for anyone who hasn't seen it, I mean, would you still recommend this film to sort of horror
Absolutely.
fans?
Yeah,
Definitely.
100%.
Yeah.
I think
And-
definitely, and without it, there wouldn't have been Dylan Moran's death in Shaun of the Dead,
Yeah.
right?
I
He gets
know.
ripped to bits. Spoilers, guys, spoilers. But he gets ripped to bits in the same way that Joe Pilato's character gets ripped to bits at the end of the Day of the Dead, just literally ripped limb from limb and
Amazing.
bits and bowels.
Well,
as
amazing
he's,
scene.
it's the
as he's in
first
the
sort of
Winchester.
body pulled in half
It
thing,
is, yeah.
and then everyone tries to copy it
It's
Yeah.
or
so
do a
brilliant.
version
Yeah.
of it.
It's
I did
so
have a
brilliant.
version in Cockney's where a character gets pulled into 3 pieces, but it was an effect too far, and we had so many effects in it. They were just like, yes, we can't afford that as well.
I mean, it is incredible. It still looks incredible in Day of the Dead, that moment when the
It
and
does,
the head
yeah,
gets
it
pulled off and
really
it's still kind of
does.
moving, and
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
brilliant. Yeah,
It really
it's so
does.
And you
clever.
don't realize it's a prosthetic head
Yeah.
until it comes off, and you're like, oh my god, that's because it's really well done.
Absolutely
You know,
amazing.
Joe Pilato actually had real guts on him.
Yeah. I can imagine.
And you can see in the outtakes, he's just gagging. He's really gagging, really badly.
I love
I
that.
couldn't do. I'm a vegetarian anyway, but so that would be like out for me. I'd
Your
be like,
worst
George,
nightmare.
see you in the bar afterwards. Go and get another chick to do this because I'm just so not doing it. But
it is. I mean, that's the thing, and without that, we wouldn't have a lot of other. And it's hard to imagine. It's hard to decide which of these three movies is the most influential in some ways, because obviously you just think all of them are in their own way. But there's a lot about Day of the Dead, actually, especially that kind of end of the world narrative. Like we said, The Walking Dead, and I feel like there's a lot that owes a debt to Day of the Dead, almost more than the other two.
That opening 5 minutes in the streets, that could have been like shot for shot lifted from an episode of The Walking Dead.
Completely.
Yeah.
And Nicotero, of course, is in it.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
So it feels like without... obviously, The Walking Dead was graphic novels.
Yeah.
And so that aside, obviously there would still be a Walking Dead as a graphic novel universe.
But it is heavily influenced.
It's heavily influenced. And I think it's really clear to see even the colour palette as well sometimes. You can really tell. And I just think how interesting that Nicotero was in Day of the Dead and around Savini so much. And now... he's kind of not the next gen, if you like, but without Day of the Dead, I don't think there would be a Walking Dead.
No, and
or
it's
in
almost
its form,
like, almost like The Walking Dead is that kind of epic vision, maybe that Romero originally had.
I think so,
of this whole world,
sprawling world and environment.
Yeah, filled with the dregs of humanity, basically, and people you do not want to be around. Guys, thank you so much for joining me to chat about this movie. It's been so much fun. Just tell me if anyone wants to come and sort of track down your work and what you guys have done and what you've made, where can they sort of find any of your projects?
They can fuck off. They can find me. My website is jamesmoranwriter.com. They can find me on Twitter @JamesMoran, and the links are all there.
Amazing. And obviously Severance, Cockney vs. Zombies, these movies are widely available, aren't they?
They are very widely and very easily available. Cockneys is actually on the Horror Channel again. It's always on the Horror Channel. Yes. Bless them. Thank you. Thank you, Horror Channel.
Yes,
and
they've got
on
a season
Netflix.
of the Dead.
It's on Netflix. They're easy to get. Severance you can get for like 10p on DVD now on Amazon.
Please buy it, because then there'll be some more money to feed our baby.
Oh, which is needed ahead of the apocalypse. You know, we need everything we can get.
Yeah. Oh, and
Tower Block is occasionally on Netflix, but it's it's on DVD for cheap and stuff.
lots of our short films. You can find out more at catdavies.com.
Brilliant.
And Bloodshed will soon be doing TV and probably part of an anthology feature, and on iTunes. And Connie is on iTunes, and our idents for Fright Fest, which are made with lots of love and zero money. And they're generally a spoof of something every year. They're all on YouTube. If they just look for James Moran on YouTube, and they'll find the playlists.
Yes.
So.
Amazing. Guys, thank you very much.
Thank you. How fun.
A huge thank you once again to the brilliant Cat Davies and James Moran. It's such a treat to finally have those guys on the podcast. I hope they will be back again next series.
Creep on in, on in, on in.
Now, in just a moment, I'll be joined by Sam Ashurst and we'll be talking all things Return of the Living Dead. But before we get into that, just want to take this moment to plug the Patreon page for the Evolution of Horror. Now, if you are a patron, you will have access to some really exciting regular bonus episodes. And this week, we have brought you an in-depth review of Jordan Peele's new movie, Us. I was joined by the brilliant Anna Bogutskaya from the BFI and the Final Girls, and we try and get to grips with what we thought of that film. There is so much to discuss. I had so many thoughts sort of bursting out of my head, and so did Anna. And if you want to hear that, but you're not a patron, all you need to do is sign up. You need to donate $5 per month to help support the podcast, support everything we do here, and you will have access to that episode, as well as a whole multitude of other bonus episodes, including a discussion that came out last week that I had with Becky Dark on the art versus the artist, and an upcoming episode next week in which I'm joined by Anna Vilcek to discuss the new Pet Sematary. So much. And as well as all that bonus content, if you are UK based, you will also get sent an Evolution of Horror sticker. Very, very exciting. So sign up now. Simply go to patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. That's patreon.com/Evolution of Horror. Now let's get into the second half of this podcast and my discussion with the brilliant Sam Ashurst. Sam Ashurst. Hello.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
I am very good. How are you?
Yeah, really good.
Good.
Excited to talk about Return of the Living Dead. I feel actually quite honoured that you've invited me on to talk about the very first zombie movie.
You're getting contentious straight away here. This is good.
Just a little bit, but
amazing.
But yeah, we'll get on to that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember actually, because it's been a long time since we podcasted together now, when we did Bergman. That was, early last year probably. And I remember even then me sort of saying I wanted to do zombies, and you were sort of keen to do Return of the Living Dead straight away. So I'm very excited to hear a bit about that. First of all, what have you been up to? You've been busy, haven't you? Frankenstein's Creature is now out on DVD, right, and Blu-ray.
Well, it's out, but it's sold out.
Amazing.
So yeah,
congrats. That's brilliant.
It's amazing news. It sold out before the actual release, so it was supposed to go on sale on March 18th, but we sold out in pre-orders. We did 200 DVDs because we shot it on the 200th anniversary of the release of Mary Shelley's novel, so it was kind of a limited run, but still 200 is quite a lot.
It's amazing.
Yeah,
it's brilliant.
I'm really proud that it sold out, and we're getting lovely tweets and pictures of people holding the DVD and all the rest of it.
Is that surreal for you? Just
Really
know that there are
surreal.
sort of 200 people out there with your film in their living room or on their shelf,
Yeah, it's crazy, really crazy. And like the amount of tweets, people saying, oh, I'm going to watch it on the projector at the weekend. And it's really, really exciting and gratifying. And yeah, I just hope that everyone enjoys it, and who knows what's next.
Yeah, that's brilliant, really exciting. Yeah, is there anything that you've got or you have going on at the moment, or anything you've got coming up that you want to talk about? Or
so I'm working on kind of a very, very side project at the moment. Basically, as you know, I've directed stuff, but I've never really sort of done my own editing. I've always used an editor. And so I just thought it would be beneficial to kind of teach myself editing. And so in order to do that, in order to sort of give myself a target so that I kind of keep at it, I've actually launched a YouTube channel.
Nice. Amazing.
It's very, very small. I haven't really promoted it on any of my own social media, but it is called Deep Cut Videos, the YouTube channel. There is a Twitter as well, which I mainly just did because I realized that no one had Deep Cut Videos as a Twitter handle.
Oh my god, brilliant.
So I've just
grabbed that.
I've grabbed that, exactly. So but I haven't really kind of promoted it anywhere yet, so it's all very low key. But if you do want to have a little look at what I've been doing, and if you like the sound of my voice on this podcast, it is mainly me just talking over clips that I've edited together. There's a few things on there. There's E.T. and Terminator 2 are the same movie. I make the case for that.
Love it.
And we've got How the Skywalker Saga Will End, which I'm going to promote if I'm right in December. And then more recent ones, I Really Hate Jonah Hex, which is a takedown of Jonah Hex from 2010, because it's about time someone did that, I guess.
Absolutely, which I just had a little sneak look at, and it was brilliant, really funny.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. And finally, we've got one where I watch Mandy with my friend Jen Moss, who's an amazing music supervisor who worked on like Prevenge and Beast and I, Tonya, and basically I made her watch Mandy for the first time and filmed her watching it. So
brilliant.
Those should all be up by the time this goes out. So Deep Cut Videos. I hope you like it.
Amazing. Fantastic. I can't wait to check them out. So, we are here to talk about zombie movies.
Yes.
We'll get to Return of the Living Dead shortly. First of all, what are your thoughts on the zombie subgenre? Are you a fan?
Right. Yes. So, I am very much so. I've been kind of obsessed with zombies since quite a young age, and I've managed to sort of I'm like a weird Forrest Gump of zombie stuff. Basically, so I was super into the Walking Dead comic.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, before it became a TV series, and as a result, I kind of really pursued an interview with the artist Charlie Adlard, because I absolutely love the art, and this was quite in the early days, so I got in there quite early, and we got on really well, and I think he saw my passion for the comic and for the genre, and he actually ended up drawing me in the comic. So I've got a cameo, a zombie cameo in The Walking Dead.
Amazing.
Yeah, I get shot in the head by Carl.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I'll show you the page after the podcast.
That's brilliant.
So yeah, and then other little bits and pieces. Total Film did an anniversary, kind of Shaun of the Dead anniversary special, and they did a photo shoot with Edgar Wright, Nick Frost and Simon Pegg. And so I'm in that as a zombie, kind of attacking them, which is quite cool.
Great.
And then in 2011, Ben Wheatley, this was around the time of Kill List, it's playing at Fright Fest, and that year a bunch of directors did tributes to John Carpenter, and Ben's was a zombie themed one.
Brilliant. Oh yeah, Dan worked on that, didn't he?
He did,
I think I remember him telling me, yes.
Exactly. And so I basically am a featured zombie in that, where like I knock down a door, I lurch through a corridor, and then I attack Mayana Burning and get a hammer to the eye.
Brilliant.
So that was quite good as well.
Brilliant.
So yeah, the reason these things kind of happen to me is because, I seek them out because I do love the zombie genre, and I know it's become oversaturated, and I've kind of heard people say that a few times over the course of this season of the podcast, and I agree to a certain extent. And I, like everyone else in the world, it's no longer watching the Walking Dead TV series because it just got awful, really awful. And it's so bizarre because I used to absolutely love that show.
It's so disappointing, isn't it? Because it was so exciting to have such a huge horror TV show property become such a phenomenon, right?
And like the biggest as well, like the biggest show. And so, yes, that has kind of led to an oversaturation. I mean, you can trace it back to, I think in your opening episode, you guys were talking about 28 Days Later, and it was said that you can't blame 28 Days Later for the resurgence.
Yeah.
You can, because I very much remember, like, I was working at a cinema at the time, and a zombie obsessive, and the world changed.
It did,
purely based on that movie, because it became such a zeitgeist film. Like, it was in the Face, like the Face magazine did a massive thing on it, and all of a sudden I just remember being quite shocked that this genre, which was very geeky and kind of belonged to me, in amongst my friends, and people just thought it was kind of a bit weird. And then all of a sudden it's in this fashion magazine, and from then on it just became cool. And I know, again, a lot of people say 28 Days Later isn't a zombie film, but everyone at the time assumed it was.
I mean, it basically is, isn't it? It's a zombie format, isn't it? Whether or not they are zombies. And
also, let's not forget, it's essentially a remake of Day of the Dead. Danny Boyle may say it's not a zombie movie, but it is in homage to a zombie movie.
Definitely.
So everything changed from that point on, and that kind of goes back to my opening statement, which is Return of the Living Dead is arguably the first zombie movie. Now, I believe that the zombie genre started in 1985 with Return of the Living Dead and Day of the Dead, which you discussed previously. Now, the reason I say that is because, as your listeners will have discovered over the course of these episodes that you've done so far, pointlessly in a way, because you should have just started here. But anyway, what they will have discovered is that there were zombie films before Night of the Living Dead, but then Night of the Living Dead had such an impact on the genre that kind of the other films were forgotten and kind of only talked about amongst hardcore cinephiles or academics.
Kind of these historical things, right?
Totally, exactly. So I would argue that Return of the Living Dead and Day of the Dead equally, so George Romero fans, I'm not
Right.
I'm not writing him out of history. But I do think that they have both so profoundly had an impact on the genre. Certainly in terms of the modern films, everything can be traced back to those two films.
Yeah.
And there's not much from Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead that has lasted, that's had a lasting impact.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the zombie rules, I mean, look at, when kids play zombies,
yes,
what do? They go brains.
Yep.
That's from Return of the Living Dead. Day of the Dead was the first kind of American movie to have, I mean, it took an influence from the Italian stuff, so let's not maybe write those out of the history just yet, but I just don't particularly like them. So
no, and I think you're right. It's kind of like it's kind of like when you talk about the sort of proto slashers, isn't it?
Yes.
And how you get Halloween, which is really the first one, but they took bits from Italian horror, horror and Black Christmas and whatever else, Psycho, Peeping Tom, but yeah, you'd still say maybe Halloween is the first, right? And it's that same thing, isn't it, where they've kind of, I get what you mean totally, and it's something we talked about just now with Day of the Dead, in that even though it's the third and the last in this trilogy as it was at the time, it feels like this is the movie that the most other zombie filmmakers have taken from in terms of that post-apocalyptic format,
100%, and it's my favourite of that trilogy. I absolutely love Day so much, and tonally, I
mean, The Walking Dead. I mean, it is basically The Walking Dead, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
It's The Walking Dead, and lots of other things as well. Before that, I mean, we talked about 28 Days Later, essentially a remake of Day. Just to circle back to what you just said about the proto slashers, that is relevant today as well because of Dan O'Bannon, of course.
Yes.
And Dan O'Bannon is kind of a fascinating character in the sort of history of horror when you talk about the evolution of horror, because he's kind of this also-ran guy who should have had the huge recognition and kind of icon status as people like Wes Craven and John Carpenter.
Yeah.
And in terms of where he fits into the proto-slashers, he actually was in a USC short film called Foster's Release in 1971, a short film that John Carpenter saw.
Right.
And it's about a killer stalking a babysitter.
Right.
Yeah, and O'Bannon actually plays the killer. And it's kind of like, when people saw the Sex Pistols and they went out and formed a band. It feels like people saw this short and went out and made movies. And so John Carpenter was inspired to make Halloween, and also it's been said to be an inspiration for Black Christmas because there's some menacing phone calls in there. And
so interesting, isn't it? How everything is always something else has already done it first.
This is it. So O'Bannon, he was involved there, and also he wrote Alien. For anyone listening to this who doesn't know that. And again, that kind of relates for me to Return of the Living Dead, because one of the key sort of set pieces in Alien, the chestburster, was said to be inspired by the pain O'Bannon had because he had Crohn's disease. And so he kind of put that into that script.
That's really fascinating.
And so Return of the Living Dead, for me, everyone always says, oh, it's so silly, oh, it's so entertaining. Yes, it is. It 100% is. I'm not about to say it's some existential masterpiece. However, I do feel like this film is one of the best films, certainly zombie films, about pain I've ever seen.
I 100% agree, and this is a topic I'm going to bring up later.
Oh, great.
But that idea of actually what it physically feels like to be a zombie, or what it feels like to turn into a zombie, and it feels like one of the first ones that does that so far.
Totally, it really is, and that's so key in terms of its influence, but also in terms of its impact, because I'm sure everyone, I mean, for me, Return of the Living Dead is a masterpiece. I believe that if it wasn't for this film, Evil Dead 2 wouldn't exist. I feel like tonally, like they are brothers.
Yeah, no, you're 100% right. It's that different. I mean, and tonally, what's so interesting is Day of the Dead and Return of the Living Dead could not be more different, right?
Totally.
I mean, this is the funny thing, and it's so interesting what you said, because you're right, because I think every film we've talked about, we've kind of gone, well, okay, yeah, White Zombie, yeah, this is technically the first zombie movie, and then we've gone Night of the Living Dead, and we're like, well, this is really the first zombie movie, isn't it? And then we went Dawn of the Dead, and me and Jen were like, well, really, this is the original zombie movie, isn't it? But it's true. But
I know I'm pushing it with Return of the Living Dead.
You're kind of right. And again, it's that a bit like the slashers, that it's got quite a lovely kind of evolution, which works really well for this podcast. But it's true that they all kind of give a little something extra, and introduce a kind of aspect. And obviously, Fulci kind of introduced this horrible sort of schlocky gore and everything as well. And you're right. In some ways, it feels like with these two movies in 1985, it's like now it is a solidified thing. Now it's a genre.
This
right?
is it. This is it. And like, in the Romero films, Day is the first one where they actually start to look like rotting corpses.
Yes.
They have kind of, each one of them has their own look, like very specifically in that kind of opening credit sequence.
Yeah.
And yeah, it returns kind of the same. But yeah, before Return, zombies were flesh eaters.
Yeah.
They didn't have a favourite food, whereas post-Return, everyone associates them with being brain eaters.
Yes.
And,
yeah, that's so true. It's true, because nothing about wanting to eat brains in the earlier one, like in Romero's earlier ones.
No, exactly.
There?
They're just literally flesh eaters. And in fact, as you rightfully pointed out, they're called ghouls. They're not called zombies. So,
Yes.
so yeah, it's. I know. By all means, dear listener, do tweet me if you're angry at me saying this. But I do think there's a case to be made.
It's fascinating. It really is. And I know we've done this a lot, compared them to slashers, but it's that same idea as well of like, okay, you get Halloween and then you get Friday the 13th. And it feels like by the time you get Friday the 13th and all those others that came out that year, it's like, and Kim Newman said something about this with the Universal, he said, of course, horror movies existed before the 30s, but it didn't become a genre until you get that glut and that recognizable format, I suppose, and recognizable look and style, and then it becomes genre, and that's with the Universal monsters kind of thing. And I guess it's the same sort of point you're making with this,
100%, exactly the same. Exactly the same.
Let me ask you a question, kid. Did you see that movie, Night of the Living Dead?
Yeah. That's the one where the corpses start eating the people, right? Sure. What about it?
Did you know that movie was based on a true case?
Come on, you're shitting me, right?
I ain't never been more serious in my life.
That's not possible. I mean, they showed zombies taking over the world.
Well, they changed it all around. What really happened was, back in 1969 in Pittsburgh at the VA hospital, there was a chemical spill, and all that stuff kind of leaked down into the morgue, and it made all the dead bodies kind of jump around as though it was alive.
What chemical?
So the story opens with a couple of morticians talking about the Night of the Living Dead movie, which is kind of amazing. And in fact, before even that, I should say that the film opens with a title card that says that everything in this film is true. None of the names of the organizations or individuals have been changed, which is just incredible. And actually, I don't know, that, it's kind of indicative. They put the tone across immediately,
straight away,
because that's very tongue-in-cheek. It's a joke, like we've all seen the card which says, none of this is true. And so A, they're subverting that, and B, in terms of scaring people, one of the things that I think really works about this film, sorry, I've digressed again.
No, go on.
But one of the things that scares me, anyway, when it comes to directors, is when they break the rules.
Yes.
Because there's nothing scary about following the rules. Like, you're safe, you know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But when a director's prepared to do something like that you don't expect, you're like, well, what are they going to do next?
Yes. Yeah.
And then you start to feel,
unsafe.
Totally.
Totally.
So it's that combination of fear and humour that is the spine of this film. But back to the plot. Basically, these guys go down into the basement because the older mortician has a can with a corpse inside.
Yeah.
And he gives it a tap. It releases some gas. And basically these guys, not only do they become infected themselves, the gas then brings various dead creatures in the building back to life. They decide to dispose of them, and all hell breaks loose. And there's also a gang of punk teenagers as well that I probably should mention. This is why Dan does the plot on the Arrow podcast. I'm terrible at it.
As am I. It's why I make everyone else do it. Yeah, that's great. That's perfect. So first of all, what's your kind of earliest memory of seeing this? Did you sort of see this when you were younger?
I did, yeah. So I saw this in the kind of early 90s, and it's so strange. Like, of all the films that I watched when I was younger and all the trips to the video shop and all the rest of it, I have such a vivid memory of finding this VHS, and it was actually in a double set. And you know, that's quite chunky, as you can imagine.
Yes, yeah.
And it was boxed with Tom Savini's Night of the Living Dead remake, which is an interesting pairing. Took it to my mate Dave's house, and we watched both. We watched Night first, and then we watched Return, and we just both looked at each other like, holy fuck, this is the best film we've ever seen. And like, literally from start to finish, it's a joy. And I've watched it so many times since, and it honestly gets better every time I watch it. Like, every time. It's so rare with movies where every time feels like the first time. It's so rare, but this is what I have with Return of the Living Dead. It was such a joy to revisit it again for this podcast. How did you feel watching it again?
Yeah, love it. And again, you know, I've watched a lot of zombie movies over the last few weeks. And some of them are harder work than others. And like you say, this film is just so much fun. And there is stuff, obviously, that we're going to talk about. There is some interesting stuff going on here. But also, you can just like switch your brain off and completely enjoy it for what it is, can't you?
Totally, yeah.
And, I mean, I guess let's go back to that initial thing, like you said, of kind of it sets itself up straight away as being this. You could almost be forgiven at the very beginning for thinking this is a very like almost Airplane or Scary Movie-esque parody, like just a spoof, by the way that it starts with that funny opening caption, and then it's got two characters, like quite wacky characters, talking about Night of the Living Dead. And you know, I just wondered, like, how do you think it ultimately balances being a comedy and a horror film?
That's such a good question, because it's something that the sequel, which I hope we're not going to talk about at length.
No. It's been a while since I've watched those.
I've only ever watched the second one once. And it was a miserable experience because it completely gets it wrong. It doesn't understand. It doesn't understand the tone of the original. And actually does treat it like kind of a wacky spoof. And I think what kind of gives it a different tone is, so in 2012 I as a Return of the Living Dead obsessive, they released a Blu-ray, and so I basically chased everyone I could in the cast that I could speak to, and so I got some really good ones. I got Linnea Quigley, which was incredible, Beverly Randolph, Jill Shepherd, Don Calfer, and Brian Peck. And Brian Peck told me quite an interesting story. It basically, he said that the cast didn't necessarily know it was a comedy. There's the line, like, so send more paramedics, right? Very funny in the film. It actually inspired a punk band to call themselves Send More Paramedics and release zombie-themed punk songs. Like, that line had an impact. But on the page, it reads quite creepy. And actually, when you watch that scene with like the lights coming on and like highlighting the zombies and them getting attacked in the it is quite scary.
Rescue 7, Connor, this is dispatch. Do you copy over?
Come in dispatch. Send more paramedics.
So he was actually upset when he first saw the movie with an audience because everyone was laughing, and he didn't understand why. He thought they were making a traditional horror film. He got over it and actually realised, oh no, this is what's given it a legacy. And he realised that it's all intentional, and Dan O'Bannon meant it, and so it wasn't like, it was people laughing at it.
Yes, absolutely.
Laughing with it.
Yeah.
So it is that very fine balance of, you do have that wacky humour to start with, but then it gets really freaky really quickly.
Yeah, it does.
And it's just every element of this film is working in perfect harmony. So you've got that to start with, and then you've got the guy bursting out, and then they cut his head off because that's what they think you have to do. But you go from the moment where they're chatting and it's kind of funny to where they're sawing the head off, and that's not funny. Because you hear the vocal cords being severed, and you hear that horrible, weird gargling sound in the sound design. Now, that is attention to detail. That is someone thinking about what an actual zombie would be like. And so then we go back to the original scene, not necessarily consciously, but subconsciously, because they have set up a world where Night of the Living Dead is a movie, and so the rules don't count. Right? They did the movie, but they kind of got it a bit wrong. So, oh fuck, we're not safe. It doesn't matter if we get him in the head. And that was a movie, but this is quote unquote real life. So you're gonna hear that horrible gargling when the vocal cords are being severed. So it's so weird and surreal, that sequence with kind of the butterflies coming to life.
I love that. I love that idea that everything is alive.
And
actually it is. And we should talk about Dan O'Bannon as a director, because he didn't really direct many movies, right? He did 3, I think, or 2. And he obviously wrote Alien, and he did he worked on so many amazing films, but this is it's something he directed, and there is so much attention to detail, I feel like, in the visuals, in the cinematography, like you say, the butterflies moving and all of those little elements, things that you can spot every time you watch it, right?
This is it. And it's an attention to detail across the board. Apparently, Don Calfer told me that he was approached by a couple of morticians after they'd seen the film, and basically said to him, man, you got that right. Like, you guys, that's what it looks like.
That's
like
amazing.
with the blood pooling and all that kind of stuff. So, and you watch it, and that stuff is horrible and feels real. So it's just such an unusual combination of kind of this slightly camp but not too much, with actually quite dark realism.
Totally. And it does, and I feel like there are a few films, I could probably count on maybe 2 hands the amount of films that really do balance horror and comedy and are not too far one or the other. And I feel like this is one of those, but there are not many, right? It's a hard thing to get right.
It is a hard thing to get right. Weirdly, the zombie genre seems to do it better than most, especially if we're counting Evil Dead 2.
Yes, if we're including them as zombie films. Absolutely. They do.
And obviously Shaun of the Dead, I think that has, it's very similar in that it's genuinely very funny, but it's also quite harrowing and quite sad.
We should talk a little bit actually about some of the background of this, and its kind of vague link to Night of the Living Dead. Obviously, like you've said, it kind of references it as a movie. But one of the writers, John Russo, was involved with George Romero on Night of the Living Dead, right? And then they kind of split off and have kind of gone their separate ways by this point, haven't they? It's interesting.
Yeah, there's that weird thing where John was able to make, is this right, of the Living Dead movies, and George was able to carry on as long as he didn't mention
that's right.
Living
It was something
Dead.
to do with he had the rights of the Living Dead.
That's
exactly.
Obviously Russo was a kind of key collaborator, and I think him and O'Bannon worked together successfully again. The legacy of Night of the Living Dead is actually quite sad. In
terms of what little they all got out of it.
In terms of what little they got out of it, and in terms of how that franchise was treated. And by franchise, I mean literally just Night of the Living Dead and all the shit that they did around it. So the colorized version, and now they're doing a fucking sequel, apparently.
I know, it's weird, isn't it? The amount of remakes as well.
There's kind of a strain of bad luck amongst these guys. Dan O'Bannon was pretty unlucky as well. Like, he was sort of there, but just didn't quite, it just never really quite clicked for him. Like, he was very involved in Jodorowsky's Dune, and and that obviously didn't happen, and he lost so much money on that he ended up kind of couch surfing amongst his friends and all the rest of it. So all that behind the scenes stuff is kind of dark. However, I do also want to make something clear, which is something that I hadn't been aware of until I talked to the cast. But O'Bannon wasn't perfect himself. The cast, some members of the cast, mostly the women, had kind of a tough time with him. Beverly Randolph told me that the moment in the film where she falls through the step, like the tar man scene, was actually real. They had a fake step made. O'Bannon sent her to makeup, then they switched the step, and when she came back, no one would look her in the eye, and she just sensed this weird atmosphere. But, you know, kind of wrote it off and carried on, and actually hurt herself quite seriously going through that step. And yeah, she kind of called him quite a rough director.
That's interesting, and it was something we talked about with Fulci, obviously. Over the last
God,
couple of
Fulci,
weeks.
Jesus Christ,
seems to be a bit of a running trend with some of these movies, and I guess it's you know, obviously, you know, these movies are full of these like blood and guts and excess of everything in excess, and you do think, God, what will these poor actors put through with some of these things?
This is it. And Jules Shepherd, do you know how she was cast in the movie?
No.
She was working in a strip club that O'Bannon went to, and basically he offered her the part of Trash, which was called Legs at the time. And yeah, basically she was dancing for him, and he was like, do you want to be in a movie? And this is something that Jules said that many women in this place had heard many times.
Yes.
But she got the script and she liked it, and she ultimately, you know, she didn't play Trash. She played the quote unquote party girl, because basically she didn't want to dance naked in a film.
Naked throughout the whole film.
Yeah, exactly. So she basically, you know, she saw it as kind of a chance to break away from being employed to be naked, and took that other part. She actually said that when Linnea Quigley was sort of performing the scene, she remembered feeling very relieved that
she wasn't doing
it wasn't her doing it. And in fact, Linnea said that, you know, doing the scene was, you know, completely fine, just another day at the office for her. The only problem she had was, you know, they're dancing around underneath her with the flares.
Yeah.
Apparently kind of the smell of it got up her nose and made her feel a bit dizzy. But other than that, she was all right. And
because you do think, watching that now as well, that is something that has dated a little bit, isn't it? That she's just this character that basically she just gets naked and that's her role in the film, really.
Yeah, I mean, I am in two minds about that.
Yeah.
Because actually all the women in the film, they're very individual, they're kind of unique. And with Trash, it's her character. It's not necessarily that she's being objectified.
Yeah.
It's her. She wants to
kind
do
of
it.
owning it.
Her owning it, and her having she's so comfortable in her own skin that not only does she do that, but, you know, she's just hanging. She's hot. She's waving herself. She's hanging around, you know, completely naked, and is totally fine about it. And in fact, everyone else has the problem.
Yes, that's what made me laugh.
And
yeah,
there are a couple of kind of, you know, the slightly nerdy guys kind of try it on, but she's completely dominant and basically waves them away.
Yeah.
So in a way, yes, it's you know, typical 80s TNA.
Yeah.
But it's not Porky's where someone's being completely objectified, if that makes sense. I know it's a weird thing to say, especially as Jewel told me that day producers, it might have been Linnea actually, but anyway, producers turned up that day and were kind of ogling her, and it was Jewel that told me this, because she then was like, they were saying, oh, you know, naked girl, and Jill was like, yeah, you know, and what type thing.
Yeah.
And Jill Shepherd, actually, she was a very, very honest, brutally honest interviewee. She told me that she was doing cocaine throughout the shoot, and it was basically very normal at the time. It wasn't that, oh my God, she's doing cocaine. It's just like, that's what people did to pass the time, and no one batted an eyelid. So it's kind of weird. It was weird talking to them and hearing about not the cocaine side, but kind of the weird producers hanging around side. It was strange to see it as, this isn't just this incredible, fun, entertaining movie. There is a dark side there as well.
Totally.
But then the film has that dark side, on the screen. So
it does. Yeah, that's really interesting.
I've just hit you with quite a lot of information.
I like it. That's great. That's amazing. Yeah. So let's talk about the zombies themselves. We've talked about Fulci zombies and Romero zombies. How are these zombies different to the ones we've seen before this movie?
So I guess the most significant aspect is that they run, that they're fast moving,
and they
also
talk.
They talk, they're intelligent, they don't just talk, they plan, the whole send more paramedics thing, and it's
really interesting.
And obviously that's kind of one of the biggest things that it shares with 28 Days Later, which then went on to influence Dawn of the Dead, which is kind of weird. Zack Snyder's remake, especially considering that in between George Romero was quite, zombies don't run, it doesn't make any sense. He was quite protective of that element of it.
But you're right. I mean, that running zombie, it kind of, we've had I think there were a couple of earlier instances in Italian cinema, but this was one of the first biggies, wasn't it?
Totally.
Where we had running zombies.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of the American mainstream.
Yes.
And again, it ties into what we were talking about earlier in terms of breaking the rules. And in Night of the Living Dead, they walk slowly, and they shuffle, but in this reality, they are faster dead than they were alive, basically. So it adds an intensity, and it adds I remember being really scared by the middle of this film.
Definitely.
When I first saw it, they are, first time you see them.
Yes.
And the effect's worn off now. Anyone listening to this who hasn't seen the movie, who watched it for the first time, I'm not sure what kind of an impact it would have on them in those terms.
I think let's talk a bit about the effects, because I think the effects still hold up really well.
Oh, in that, definitely. The practical effects.
The kind of skeleton one with the kind of moving spine on the autopsy table, and all of those elements are just brilliant, aren't they? It holds up. So I love all of the practical effects.
Absolutely. And I think Dan O'Bannon's role on Dune was going to be special effects supervisor. So he does have a background in that world. And it all ties into the attention to detail thing. It's all and even the less kind of showy effects, like the blood pooling and like the dead body that's being drained.
Yes. There is there's something, because again we've talked a lot about zombies, kind of that they kind of go one way or the other. They can be purely kind of mystical, I guess, if you want to put it that way, or they can be more medical and clinical. And I think this is something we talked about a bit with Cronenberg's early, like Shivers and Rabid, and that kind of body horror aspect. It feels like there's something more medical about these zombies and about what's happening to them. And I think when I first watched it as well, I found it scary, and it wasn't so much the zombies, but it's when the two guys begin to turn and they're in so much pain. And you mentioned this at the beginning, but we should talk about this element of pain and the fact that these zombies are just constantly in pain, and brains are the only thing that can get them out of that pain, right? And it's quite a kind of, it makes it feel very real suddenly, that, doesn't it?
Okay, just give me a second to rest, catch my breath, then we'll do it, okay?
Hey, Frank, I don't know about you, but I'm really sick.
What? What's wrong, Fred?
I feel like hell is what's wrong. I'm really sick.
I'm sick too, Bert. Sick? Like how?
I feel like my head's gonna bust wide open. And I want to puke. And I'm weak, too.
Me too.
Yeah, and it's really interesting on loads of different levels. As I said, Dan O'Bannon had Crohn's disease, and weirdly, that's something that causes you more pain if you eat the wrong thing. You're kind of in more pain. So it's interesting that he's kind of tweaked the mythology so that zombies are craving brains to take away the pain, and then the pain starts again. But I just think that O'Bannon's experience with pain just really had an impact on this film, because I've never heard cries of anguish. People can talk about James Cameron's performance, and I know some people laugh at it, like, because he's kind of...
Just remind us, which character does he
the
play?
elder mortician.
Yeah.
You know, he's a little bit over the top and all the rest of it, but I don't know, it feels weirdly truthful to me, and it's all... It's not like he's all over the place in terms of where he's pitching it. It's very constant. And so when we get to the bit where he's in pain and he's screaming out in anguish, you feel it.
Yeah.
Like, you really feel those cries, like when they get moved. It's so horrible to listen to.
Yeah.
So yeah, that really adds to the unnerving. It's why I do find it slightly odd when people do refer to this film as being purely fun. It is fun, don't get me wrong, but it's also so dark and so bleak, and we'll get to the ending, obviously, which ties into a lot of other things that were going on in the 80s. But I just feel like this is a kind of super dark film.
Yeah, well, it's really interesting, and I think it is, like you say, it's a fun movie, and I think especially when you look at it alongside Day of the Dead. I mean, like, I know that because we're, you know, as we both said, we're big fans of Day of the Dead, but I know that it probably didn't have the best reception initially with kind of big wide audiences as much as Dawn of the Dead, and you can see why, right? Because it is so bleak and kind of nihilistic, and I imagine, in comparison, then Return of the Living Dead coming out in cinemas that same year must have been so much more of a kind of crowd pleaser, I imagine.
Definitely. Do you know what? I'm starting to think that one of the reasons that this is a perfect movie is that 5 people could watch it and they could all see something different or have kind of a different experience of it.
Yeah.
Because there's loads of really fucking weird stuff that you only see properly when you watch it again, maybe the second or third time. Like weird Easter eggs, like you've got Don Calfer's character, it's Ernie, right? I know it's Bert and Ernie.
Bert and Ernie, brilliant.
Yeah. So there's that. Yeah, you've got Bert and Ernie.
Apparently not intentional, apparently.
Not intentional, but with those characters, so there's so much there. So we've got Ernie, who there's loads of weird shit where basically he's named after a real Nazi.
Yeah, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, and when he went into the audition, he had the Walkman. This is from my interview with him. So he went in with the Walkman and kind of blew them away with that. But he had like a moustache and kind of long black hair, but offered to chop it and dye it blonde because he was playing this Nazi. And he has like, he's got like the German gun, and there's a picture of Ava Braun in the background, and
so
like
weird.
The music he listens to and stuff, and it's never referred to at all, ever.
And again, was it intentional? I don't know.
It must have been. Like, because you don't put Ava Braun in the background without...
No, that's very true. That's very true. Shared his name with the Nazi Ernst Kaltenbrunner. That's just brilliant.
That's it. So you've got that, right? And then you've got Bert and Ernie, who may or may not be a couple. It's not clear, but there are moments in this film where you could read it in that way.
Yep.
There's lines and there's looks where it's not there for any other reason than to suggest that maybe they're in love. There's all of these kind of different layers. And I guess because I'm a miserable motherfucker, I watch this film and I just see this kind of Day of the Dead style, quite dark, quite bleak thing. But like you say, people could go see this on a Friday night and have the fucking time of their lives. And you know, maybe that's where, you know, what Brian Peck said about when he read the script, like he had no idea it was a comedy, and several other cast members felt the same way. And maybe that's it, you know, it's like this weird perfect movie where everyone can enjoy it in a different way because there's lots to see and experience.
100%. And it's the same with, I suppose it's all very subjective, what you find scary and what you find funny. I mean, when I was telling Chris Stewart, when I watched Evil Dead 2 as a kid, I found it terrifying when I was young, when all of the furniture starts laughing at him. And obviously that's very funny now, but there is something that really terrified me about it when I was young.
I had exactly the same experience, and I think we're onto something here, and I think it's super relevant with Return of the Living Dead, where there is something about that combination of comedy and horror, where the comedy lets your guard down, you laugh, you have a release, you relax, and then the horror gets you.
Yes.
Like in Evil Dead 2, for me, yes, that scene freaked me out. For me, one of the scariest, it's very small, but one of the scariest moments in Evil Dead 2 is where the rocking chair's rocking.
Yes.
And he kind of reaches out with his hand and stops it.
Yeah.
And then the hand gets infected. But that moment, just, it's scary.
It's
so
totally.
Yeah, and I think it's similar with Return, where there are moments in this film, and it's, you know, it's gory, it's bloody and all that kind of stuff, but just tonally it's just very dark in places.
And I wonder if, because it's interesting what you said, because it reminded me of, not to go off too much on a tangent, but it reminded me of when you...
I love tangents.
I know. It reminds me of when you sent in a message on the end of year episode talking about Mandy being your favourite film of the year, and you said that it kind of annoyed you that a lot of people in your screening were laughing at the kind of the level of, you know, Nick Cage's acting in the second half. And I agree with you, because I think that that was the problem I had with that film, and maybe it was the audience I saw it with, but I was so on board for the first half because it was so tragic and dark and heartbreaking and horrible. And then for me, it went into I was like, I was really enjoying how dark and heartbreaking it was. And for me, it lost a bit of that. And maybe I will watch it again at some point, because maybe it was because of that scenario of everyone cheering and laughing at Nick Cage, you know, because you're right, it is a heartbreaking story and a really dark film in a lot of ways.
So the first time I saw Mandy, right, so I saw it twice. I saw it once, and this was weird. Basically, Universal asked me to come and see it, and I thought it was a normal screening, and it turned out it was just me.
Oh, right.
So it was me alone in a screening room. Like, the security guard stayed with me for about 30 seconds, and then he's like, I'm going to leave you to it, and went off, and it was just me. And
that's the way to see it, right?
Totally. Like, I was in the front row, completely enveloped by the sound, like, it, you know, so close to the screen, and I cried my eyes out at that film, man. I really did. And it bothers me so much. So then I went to see it a second time with the director in attendance.
Yes.
And what kind of annoyed me in that second screening was especially the moment where they're in the car at the end and he turns, like, you know, he's imagining her, and he kind of turns and gives that big smile that became like a gif that went round and all the rest of it. And the first time I saw it, that moment made me cry my eyes out, because he is truly mad in that moment. Truly mad, truly gone, truly lost. And it's not a funny Nicolas Cage, you know, meme moment. And he does that. Like, there's a moment in Face Off where like they're talking about where he's with the gang, and it's Nicolas Cage, but it's really John Travolta, and he's pretending, and you get these flashes where you see the pain he's in, having to pretend. Anyway,
he's brilliant.
It's got nothing to do.
Nothing to do with it.
Dead.
But it reminded me of that same. It reminded me of that same thing where if you want to see the pain, if you're miserable bastards like us, and if you want to see that element of it, it's there, right? But it also has that kind of fun, wacky element to it too, which is great.
And we should talk about the ending, I guess. In these terms,
let's talk about the ending. Yeah.
Hey, listen. You hear anything?
Yeah, it is, again, this kind of very dark humor where, you know, they do what they're supposed to. They phone the number on the side of the can, and the military then basically sends a bomb down. And what is it? Only kills 4,000 people or something.
That's
and
right.
It's only 20 blocks off target.
Yeah.
Again, attention to detail. The fact that, you know, these military motherfuckers, they do not have your interests at heart.
Totally.
All they're trying to do is, you know, get rid of the problem. But by trying to get rid of the problem, they exacerbate it, and the acid rain falls, and we know that this film is ending basically with the end of civilization as we know it. And obviously, you know, this was released in the mid-'80s.
Right in the middle of that kind of scare.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, this is kind of Threads time and When the Wind Blows and all that kind of stuff. So, an incredibly bleak ending.
Really bleak, powerful. And again, you know, you could see it's funny. It's kind of like the end of Doctor Strangelove. It's kind of funny, but also really fucking dark.
Because it is funny. It is funny. And, you know, in that kind of ironic, dark way.
Exactly.
You know, even like, it's so tragic, man. Like Bert saying, you know, hey, can you hear something? You know, like, almost hopeful that, like, this is the solution that's coming, but all our heroes are killed. It's like the end of Night of the Living Dead, but times, you know, 4,000.
And it's amazing, isn't it? Because we've talked about this already, but, you know, the idea that zombie movies, for the most part, are kind of tonally quite fun to watch, classically, but they always have these horrible endings. Like, the zombies ultimately win. There's so few movies, isn't there? I can barely think of any where the zombies are defeated and human race wins. You know, it's always the other way around.
I mean, I think that that's probably because the unifying metaphor of zombies is, I mean, there's lots of different takes. And they're used as metaphors for different societal problems and all the rest of it, but ultimately they are the personification of death, and so death will always win. Like, you know, we will fight it off for as long as we can, but ultimately we're gonna be those guys rolling around in pain before we so that's a cheery way to end. But actually, before we end, we've gone this whole thing without talking about punk, and I feel that people will be very disappointed if we don't talk about that element of this, because it's so significant.
Well, I was about to ask you about the kind of, it's so 80s, right? It's one of the most 80s movies I've seen. But let's talk a little bit about that punk element.
Yeah, because, you know, I don't quite know how they did it, but they did manage to write a kind of legitimate punk film, like you know, the attitudes there, the kind of philosophies in there, the look certainly
definitely.
And Linnea Quigley was actually in a punk band when she read the script, and that was one of the things that she kind of connected with, the fact that it did kind of get that right. And the soundtrack is just incredible.
And I guess it all
both
does,
the score and the songs actually, but it's especially the songs, the way they're used. Even like, what's that song, Tonight We'll Make Love Till We Die, where it's kind of used as Trash's theme. And then kind of, it's like they've reversed it. When she's sort of coming out of the mist before she attacks that homeless guy. And again, attention to detail. That is a very clever mind that's thought, how do we make this feel a bit off? How do we make it feel a bit weird? And the fact that they're able to take those songs, which you could listen to in a club and be perfectly happy, and make them kind of creepy and
work with the tone.
And even that even party time where, you know, the skeleton pops up, like, that's weirdly creepy as well, but also fun. And it's incredible how all of these things kind of coalesce into a tone that it is very, very, very hard to get right.
And I suppose
really
it does connect to the punk element, because this film is kind of like, it's got the kind of anarchic feel to it, but it's also kind of silly, but it's also dark, and it is what punk is, I suppose, as well, in so many ways. So you're right.
Holy shit! Yeah, that's such a good point, Mike, because it's got the kind of rough and ready. It's got the look. it's like you say, definitely a sense of humor is kind of an underrated element of punk. But also the politics, where you've got that kind of satire against authority and government, because ultimately they make the biggest fuck up of everyone.
Of them all,
You know, they're the ones that have kind of doomed humanity to either being zombies or running away from zombies. And it's kind of a shame. I wish they'd have kind of somehow managed to carry on with that in the sequels, but obviously you know, the sequels they get worse.
That's what I was going to, let's briefly finish. I know neither of us have rewatched them for this, but just briefly, is it worth, for people who haven't seen the sequels, is it worth them checking them out?
The only one I would recommend you watch is Return of the Living Dead Part 3, which you know, part of the marketing of Shaun of the Dead was it was the first ever rom-com. But in actual fact, you know, Return of the Living Dead is very much that.
They vowed to stay together forever, that their love would never die. But their pledge remained untested.
Oh, cool. No problem. I'm the boss's son, remember?
Until they went looking for a thrill and stumbled on the chilling fact.
Let's proceed.
That even the dead can go on living.
He came back to life. We gotta get out of here.
And tonight, fate will put their promises to the test. Now that she's dead, he's frightened to live without her. But bringing her back is terrifying.
Oh, God, Kurt, that was incredible. Let's do it again.
It's kind of a Romeo and Juliet story, except, you know, Juliet is brought back to life. So, and it's kind of very gory, very gloopy. Perhaps if I'd have seen that first, I'd like it more. But it's just in the shadow of this utter masterpiece. It's Return of the Living Dead. So, but, you know, and also from the same year, I would recommend that people watch Reanimator. I don't know if you're
we are
fantastic.
Doing it alongside Death Becomes Her, so it's quite a fun pairing.
That's incredible.
These kind of miracle elixirs bringing people back.
I love it. Yeah, that's fantastic. And just a slightly obscure recommendation that you can track down. Now, dear listener, you may avoid this film based on the title. The title is horrendous. And I don't know if you've seen this one, Mike. I think there's a good chance you have. But Bong of the Living Dead.
I have not seen this.
Right, okay.
Brilliant.
So it played at the Soho Horror Festival.
Right.
Last year. And actually, Soho Horror Festival was a lovely little festival. It's coming back this
is
year.
Mitch Harrod's festival.
It's Mitch's festival, exactly. And so, you know, curated very much to his taste.
Yeah.
And one of the gems in the lineup, which was very unexpected for me because, you know, that title.
Yeah.
But it's basically like this Richard Linklater kind of slacker movie.
Nice.
But with zombies.
Okay.
And both work really well. I was very, very shocked by it, but it's a lovely little hidden gem.
Amazing.
And pretty much everyone I spoke to that saw it did also love it.
Well, that's it. And this is the thing with zombie movies. There are so many, especially right now, that we need recommendations like that because anything you hear a title like Bong of the Dead, you're not going to watch it unless somebody recommends it to you.
This is it, and there's so many of them with
so many of the Deads as well, you know,
so many of them with terrible titles. Like one that I think you've mentioned before, but I think it's worth re-mentioning because it is a sort of quiet little masterpiece. Harold's Going Stiff.
Yes.
Why the fuck did they call it that? They could have called it anything else under the sun.
Yeah, because it sounds like a joke title.
It sounds like a joke. It sounds like, you know, it sounds like some weird 80s teen comedy about a guy that can't get rid of a hard-on. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it sounds like a Carry-On movie or
It
something.
really does, exactly. Whereas it's this kind of beautiful kitchen sink drama about an old guy who has a carer who's gradually turning into a zombie. And it's very moving and bleak and sad and all those other things that I love. But it's also super original and just works really well.
Interesting. This was going to be my last question for you, and it may be something you've already talked about tonight, but what is your favourite zombie movie?
Yeah, it will be something I've already talked about tonight. Because it's Return of the Living Dead.
Yeah, I thought it would be.
But second, equal, I'd say, actually, Evil Dead 2, if we're counting
that.
And I do think it counts. Like, they are deadites, not zombies, and, it's got its whole own mythology, but it is people being confronted by people they thought were dead, coming back to get them, you know.
Plenty of gruey, schlocky body horror,
Totally.
dismembering corpses, coming back to life. It does fit. It feels like it fits.
It totally fits. And Day of the Dead, like I've talked about all of them really.
So all from this kind of 85, 86 golden period for you.
Totally. And that is the way to put it. It was an absolute golden period. Some people are down on it, but I love Army of Darkness as well. I saw that at the cinema in 92, off the back of loving Evil Dead and watching it basically every day for a year. And then Army of Darkness,
great. It's a totally different thing, but still fun.
Exactly. And kind of would work, in a double bill with Return, I think. Similar, silly and gruey.
Absolutely. Gruey's always the word. Amazing. Sam, thank you so much for joining me. This has been so much fun. Just tell us again one more time sort of where people can find you on social media and where they can find your new YouTube channel as well.
So I am at Sam Ashurst on one Twitter. I'm also at Deep Cut Videos on another Twitter. Please follow me on that one, even though there's probably only 5 people on there at the moment. Do follow me there. And on that Twitter channel, I will be putting up all the videos I make for Deep Cut Videos over at YouTube. So please also, if you've got a YouTube, subscribe to me there because it really helps.
It does. It always helps.
Yeah, it does. And I'll be doing lots of horror nonsense over the next sort of month or so.
Brilliant.
So, great. Thank you so much, Mike.
Thank you very much. And that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening, and a big thank you to all of my guests who joined me to discuss these 2 movies, Kat Davies, James Moran, and of course, Sam Ashurst. Such a treat to have them all on the podcast this week. So, get in touch. What do you think of these 2 movies? Which one is your favourite? Do you favour the bleak, murky world of George Romero, or do you prefer the more punk, fun, tongue-in-cheek 80s sensibility of Return of the Living Dead? Get in touch. The email address is evolutionofhorror@gmail.com. Don't forget you can find us on all social media platforms including Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. You can also follow us on Letterboxd, and that's where you can keep up to date with what movies we're going to be covering over the next few weeks in the zombie series. That's letterboxd.com/evolutionpod. You can find all other episodes of this podcast, including 3 whole seasons of episodes and a whole bunch of bonus content and a whole bunch of written pieces in the blog section, all on our website. Just go to evolutionofhorror.com. You can find this podcast on all major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, Acast, and various others. And if you get a chance, please do subscribe, hit that review button, leave us a little positive rating or review if you get a minute. It means the world to me, and it helps the podcast get discovered by new listeners. So, next week we're going to continue this trend of double billing the movies because, quite frankly, there are so many zombie movies to cover and I don't want to be here all year. So, for the next few weeks we're going to be doubling up the guests and doubling up the movies. Next week I've got a cracking double bill for you and some big names involved. One of them directed by Wes Craven and the other based on one of the scariest novels by Stephen King. So, in the first half of the episode I'm going to be joined by Becky Dark and we are going to be discussing The Serpent and the Rainbow from 1987. Then, in the second half of the episode, I'll be joined by brand new guest Anna Vilcek, and we will be discussing Pet Sematary. That's the original Pet Sematary, directed by Mary Lambert from 1989. And it means I'll finally get to discuss my crippling, morbid fear of one of the most terrifying characters in all of horror cinema, Zelda. Join us next week for all of this and more on the evolution of horror.